so now we're on to some of the challenge problems, and we'll let you add, some fun statement to your program when it reaches that minimum distance or reaches that overlap that we're trying to achieve. Fusion, for instance. Okay. So we'll let you do that. Now, the second challenge problem asks you to not give the particle, the incoming particle, an initial velocity, but just place it simply next to that other positive charge, that target charge. So we'll discuss why we want to look at that. So let's go over here, and I'll change the mass of that incoming particle back to 1, and so our target particle is at 500. Let's put this incoming particle, that other particle, at position 470. So that should be pretty close. So let's run it here. Okay, so it gets pushed out. It gets pushed off by that target charge to be accelerated this way. Let's make that effect a bit more dramatic. I feel like we can get more out of this. So let's make that repulsion stronger. As we said, you can change the charges involved. So let's change them both to 2. Hopefully we can read them. Okay, so we had a really big velocity arrow on our accelerating charge at the time. So if you're able to, get 2 charges close together as they repel each other, there's a lot of energy stored in that. So what we're kind of seeing here is how energy is generated in a nuclear fission type process. So there was nuclear fusion, there's also nuclear fission. So in the process of nuclear fission, you're breaking apart atomic nuclei, and you'll suddenly have like charges that are very close to each other. And suddenly they'll want to repel each other, violently. And by violently, I just mean that they're going to have a lot of energy they're going to achieve a lot of energy in pushing each other away. And so that energy can be harnessed for all sorts of ways. With a nuclear fission type process, what you're often using to break apart the nuclei are neutrons. Now, that should make some sense. Why would we use neutrons to try to break up other nuclei?
Well, if we think about neutrons, so neutrons are so named because they're neutral, right? They don't have a charge associated with them. So if they don't have a charge associated with them, let's go back to what we were talking about earlier when we were changing those charges of the particles, and basically we saw that minimum distance that we were calculating down here, that increase or decrease whether we increase or decrease the charge. So when we decrease the charge, the minimum distance decreased. So that means it was able to get closer to the target particle or the target nucleus if we were talking about nuclear fission. So kind of the way we would do that, especially with nuclear reactors, is you want, instead of emitting electrons or protons or anything that has some sort of positive charge, we would want to emit neutrons, right? Because those have neutral charges. It's going to be a lot easier for them to interact with whatever charged particles that we're dealing with, or the charged nuclei that we basically want to break up when we're doing fission, basically.
Because they don't feel that repulsion.
Yeah, if they don't feel that repulsion, then they're able to interact a lot easier, and it's easier to cause nuclear fission, basically. So that's kind of the idea behind why in particle accelerators and nuclear reactors, we would use neutrons instead of, say, a proton or electron or other charges.
And you can also think about how if you had, because neutrons are better for nuclear fission, it's also worse to be hit by neutron radiation. So, it can pass through a lot more without being deflected or lose energy through coulombic interaction, like a radiation produced by positive charge, and it can get into your cells and disrupt your DNA a lot more easily. So that's bad. You don't want to be hit by that.
Because I mean, even with we know about like UV radiation. We know that can be damaging to your skin, or like gamma rays or beta radiation, which is really more electron radiation type deal. Those when those interact like with your skin, they don't they start dispersing their energy. They can't really penetrate as deeply into you and into your cells and kind of affect your DNA, like you were saying with neutrons, because like with beta radiation, you have electrons that are charged, or UV rays, which are you have an EM wave, whereas with neutrons, because they're not charged, they're able to like you were saying, like they penetrate a lot deeper and then they affect your DNA. So neutron radiation is a lot more dangerous than even like gamma radiation, which we know is incredibly damaging to your skin. Neutron radiation is still a lot worse.
So after much trial and error, Joe and I have figured out how to modify the code to allow both particles to move due to that coulombic interaction. So let's look at what we did. So things get a lot more complicated once you have to essentially double number of variables you're working with. So keep those variable names straight. So I'm going to go in and comment out, these new variables we have for the velocity of our target particle now, which we're allowing to move, the change in the velocity that we update each time step, and some of these other variables. I'll go and do that now. Okay, so we have dx target, dy target, delta vy, delta vx. We can give our target particle mass now. And now we're updating the velocity of the target particle along with its position. Okay, now the thing we have to think about a bit is, what is different about the field that the target particle experiences? So what did you have to change to get this right?
So basically, like what we're doing, so we had that if statement that we had before, which we have right here, which was basically checking to see the position of our incoming particle, and as it gets closer and closer to the target particle, which is here right now, and basically checking to see how it should respond. So what we're going to do is, if we want our target particle then to also respond in that state fixed like we had before, as the incoming particle comes in and interacts with it, well, we'll basically just have the same type of this statement with a couple minor tweaks. So we'll go into our code here, and I'm going to uncomment this section out of our if, which has an if statement, which is very similar to the one we had before. So, but instead of the electric field that we had before, that was the electric field that the incoming particle felt from the target particle, now we're going to have the electric field that the target particle feels from the incoming particle, and that's going to cause the target particle to move as well as our incoming particle. And so to do that, we have a electric field, not just E this time, but electric field of our target particle. And so we have that. We're also going to uncomment this so we can update our velocity of our target particle. We'll have our Q target, our E target, and then the mass of the target particle, which for us, we just decided to make it 2 just to make it a little bit bigger. You could make it whatever you want. But so now we have this if statement that should, when we run this, should have the incoming or the target particle, respond to the incoming particle. So
I think the only thing we had to change in this if statement, besides like the names of things was that the opposite signs. So when in the case where the incoming particle is being pushed this way, that particle is going to push the target particle that way. So we want the signs of that to be opposite and similar if they're on the other sides of each other.
Can't forget about that sign.
That's right.
So let's see what we get. And there we go. So now we get our target particle, which is actually responding to the incoming particle, and it moves away. It actually responds to it. So now we can get both of the particles to move, and you see the actual minimum distance that we got, which is calculated here. It's not 68.9, 96 as well? Yeah, 96. So like we did before with the math on the white, when we were back at the whiteboard, and we calculate the minimum distance that we had for that when we had the target particle fixed, you can do this exact same thing if you have both particles responding to each other. So if you want to, we can actually do this derivation as well. It's a little bit more complicated, and there's a few extra steps that you have to keep in mind when we're doing this. But
we did it.
Yeah.